Welcome, Regions. This is Web3 Roots Podcast, a space to explore the hearts and minds of regions all over the world. What are the views, motivations, and influences of founders and contributors in the Web3 space? What are the ideas shaping their actions? Let's take a deeper dive into their whys and get to the roots. Welcome, folks, to a new episode of Web3 Roots Podcast. This is a space where we explore the soul of regions all over the world. We dive into their roots, their origins, their ideas, what moves them, what inspires them. So today, my guest is Antonio Paglino. Not Paglino, not Pagliano, Antonio Paglino, all right? Antonio has been on a mission
It's
to
actually
build. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
in Italian. It's pronounced. The Italian language has a tricky pronunciation with the GLI. It's pronounced ye, so it's Paglino. It's really
Paglino.
hard you have to curl the tongue and Paglino. Yes, and the
Paglino.
meaning is the tongue has to go up behind the top two front teeth. So the Paglino. Yeah, and it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. Growing up in the U.S., everybody pronounced it Paglino, and of course all the other derivatives: Pagliano, Peregrino, Pella.
And what's the meaning? What's the meaning of Paglino? Paglino.
Right, the meaning. So paglia is a straw that you would find on like a wheat or a cereal. So if you've ever seen like wheat growing in the field and then they cut it down, they harvest the
Mm-hmm.
grain, and then what's left over is the straw, is the paglia. And the paglino is a little one. It's a tiny straw. So I think my ancestors were were definitely peasants working in the field, which makes sense because if we're talking about like sole purpose, it makes sense that I've returned to my ancestral homelands in Sicily and have taken up the one straw revolution.
That's beautiful. So, Antonio, you've been on a mission to build the next ecological economy for a planetary network of bioregional nations. But please introduce yourself for those who may not know you.
Yes, that's probably one of the intros that is pretty unusual. But I grew up in the suburbs of Florida. It was very kind of what you would expect from TV or from movies, and it was a very I would say normal life, but normal in a way that looking back, I wouldn't want to raise my kids in that environment. And by that I mean growing up in a suburban, disconnected. I mean, it was fun. In the '90s, there was more optimism, and growing up, it felt you had Captain Planet and a lot of these other kind of more optimistic cultural influences. But at the same time, uh, growing, my parents divorced when I was one. I have an older sister. So growing up in kind of like a split household, and growing up in suburbs, which is already very disconnected from what would be considered like a tighter knit community. Um, I grew up with the sense that there was something missing. So as I grew older, I went in search of that missing element, and that after college, let's see, where should I where should I stop in for like little vignettes? So I went to high school, and it was very much I was like an outsider. That was I was very into like kind of skate, surf, punk rock, and school was very boring. And I went to public school, and it was kind of one of these things where you're in a prison, um, and that's masquerading as a school. In the U.S., they have what are called resource officers. So basically, they put police officers inside the school to police the kids. Um, and yeah, the '90s were a very weird time, and going even into the early 2000s, we had the war on drugs, uh, and then at the same time, then you had 9/11 in 2001. So growing up in kind of this like very tense warlike police state that was kind of marketed as like safety. It was very weird. It was a very weird time. And looking back, I mean, it makes sense. The more you dig into American history, even like the history of the Americas, it just gets more depressing the more you peel back. Just because there's been so much unresolved trauma over the ages, from genocide to slavery to just resource extraction, exploitation. I mean, this is, I don't want to be so like negative, but it's one of these things where we have to acknowledge the history so that we can come to grips with our current reality. And I think that's been my biggest critique of American culture, even the West in general, is there's been really no reconciliation with the past. So we find ourselves at a very disconnected moment in the present. And so my journey has been, how do we reconcile these differences? And that really became apparent in 2008 when, so there was, 2008 was interesting because I was finishing up my last year in college. I got a degree in economics, environmental economics, and I had drifted into that because I was fascinated with China and their growth trajectory. And this was at the time when China got accepted into the World Trade Organization in 2001. And then after that, it was announced that China would host the Beijing Summer Olympics in 2008. So I get this opportunity to go study abroad in China, doing a language program, and we get shipped to Chengdu, which is in the southwest province in Sichuan. And it was our third day in the country, and we got to our first class, and like 2 minutes before our first class was about to start, we're sitting in the classroom. We hear this loud noise, like a train, and it was like so loud. It was like, wow, this why are they playing music this loud? Like we're thinking, like, because metropolitan city in
Mhm.
China is already crazy. Like there's just so much activity going on. It's like it's already so much noise. But this was a really loud noise, and then we start feeling the building shake, and then it dawns on us that this is an earthquake. So we're on, I don't know, the fourth or fifth floor, and then we start running out of the building as it's shaking. Um, and then we get outside. Everybody's outside. Everybody's kind of wondering what's going on. And for the next few hours, we're in this situation where nobody really knows what's going on because there is no like voice from above to say, "Okay, everybody, stay calm. It was an earthquake. We know." So we're actually we're in a state of a lot of disarray. But of course, everybody's like, helping each other. Everybody's outside, like, okay, what's going on? Turns out it was an 8.6 magnitude earthquake that hit outside in a town called Wenchuan. So basically, after that, like, I mean, the Chengdu city like suffered some minor damage to the buildings, but what you ended up happening was like a humanitarian crisis where everybody's like sleeping on the streets because nobody wants to go back inside because you don't know if there's going to be another earthquake, and there was rumors saying, oh, there's going to be like aftershock that's even bigger, and oh, there's like a big dam and the city's under this dam, and like the dam could break, and so it was this crazy situation where you had extreme uncertainty about what's going to happen next, but at the same time you had extreme solidarity amongst everybody in the situation. So being like the only foreigners in this like multi-million person city, we were immediately like integrated into like the family. So from day one, well, day three, there was a sense of welcoming and belonging by the warmth of the people. And this is what you wouldn't think if you look from the outside of China as like, ooh, scary communists, like, oh, what are they doing in their bamboo curtain? But turns out everybody was really sweet, really warm. But unfortunately, we could not stay in Chengdu, even though it was one of my favorite cities in China. We ended up being relocated to Beijing, which you could say was another kind of disaster zone because the whole city was a construction site in preparation for the Beijing Olympics. So we got shipped out to Beijing, and spent the rest of the summer there, and it was, really eye-opening as somebody who had never traveled internationally before, and who had only, done some minor travel to family, and I didn't have much travel experience. So being thrown into this like international place and time was really eye-opening. So I finish up that summer in Beijing, go back to finish up my last semester in Florida, and two big things happened. One, Obama got elected president, which if you were to go back to 2007, which is when we started the Gators for Obama Club, and we were going, we were like, we were considered like the craziest people. Like, yeah, Obama's never going to win. It's not even like, and there was also a lot of racism too, because in the South there was.
What were you studying?
I studied economics.
Okay.
And I liked economics because it kind of touches on everything. It's like a cultural science or a pseudoscience. But anyways,
Yes, I was going to ask you why economics?
just because that's how my brain works that way, and it clicked. I started off as an English major, and then I saw how much they wanted me to read, and I'm like, I can't I can't deal with that. So I switched to the business school, but just going back to the Obama thing, because 2007, Obama was like considered a zero, like not going to happen. So a few people, we kind of started a organization on campus to promote Obama for president. So anyways, after I come back from my time in China and I see the Chinese propaganda, I go back to the US. I'm like, oh, it's just propaganda with American characteristics. So then I realized, okay, this whole presidential thing is not real. It's just like another show. Like you call it's just a different political. It's two sides of the same political system. So when I got back to the U.S. that fall in 2008 during the election, I could see through kind of the theatrics, and this was like people had a lot of hope. Like there was renewed enthusiasm, Obama getting elected. And one of the things that really pushed Obama into the office was there was a market crash, economic collapse. And this wasn't like anything, oh, it came out of nowhere. Like there were warning signs for a long time. So 2008 rolls around. It's like John McCain versus Barack Obama, Republican, Democrat, and Obama's like the change candidate. Oh, we gotta fix global warming, end the war, blah blah blah. Like all these things that we have to do that should have been done like 15 years ago. So when the conservative candidate who's saying, oh, the economy's strong, the economy crashes, John McCain loses, Obama's president. Meanwhile, there's like a economic crisis with George Bush in the White House, who's leaving soon, so he doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't care. He's on the way out. So basically, as the economy crashed, I'm graduating into a crashed economy, and so I decide, okay, I found a teaching opportunity back in China. So that's when I said, I'm leaving. I'm totally disillusioned. I have no interest in staying in the U.S. and I want to go further discover what it means to be human, and alternatively, what is the real economy that needs to work for the future. So this is the journey that began, I think, in 2008, appropriately. And so I've been on this journey ever since. So I ended up living in mainland China I did a 4-year stint where I basically wanted to get down to the bottom of the insanity, which I went from Beijing. My first job was actually doing podcast production. This was 2009 in Beijing. I'm working for like in a home studio for this guy who later on went to go on to co-found like this like really crazy blockchain called Saito, which I don't know if anybody in the audience has ever heard of it, but it's like totally it's interesting. It actually works, but it's just a totally different frame of reference to how blockchains work. What is the incentive mechanism? But anyways, like 2009, blockchain was like nobody was talking about Bitcoin because and also too, Bitcoin was a response to the failed economic monetary policy of that 2008-2009 crisis. So these things like there's a reason why we've gotten to this point. So anyways, I'm doing podcast production in Beijing, doing all sorts of like fun adventures and recording it and turning it into educational material for this website that teaches Chinese online through podcasts. So podcast was like still a very early medium. And so I was like getting exposed to what is it like to run an internet startup. And I eventually, Beijing becomes a little bit too predictable, even though it was a blast. And so I decided I want to go on a cross-country bicycle ride because I was riding fixed gear at the time, and that was like my I was doing fixed gear and Hash House Harriers. So Hash House Harriers is a running club it's a drinking club with a running problem. So it was like a fun expat community. But Beijing was just getting a little bit too boring, and I wanted to explore deeper. So I go on this bike trip from Chengdu to Kunming to Chengdu, so about 1,500 kilometers. And on the way, I stopped at this hotel that this American couple had turned into basically an old courtyard home. It gets turned into a boutique hotel. So I ended up helping them manage the hotel for 2 years in this like really beautiful rice farming village in this little town called, well, I mean, Dali is, I mean, it's not a small town. It's a pretty major tourist destination, but one of like these smaller villages on the periphery. So that was my real first introduction to the what would be considered like agricultural culture, where you're living in a village, maybe a couple thousand people.
Yeah, and you haven't had that experience back in Florida, right?
No, no. My experience in Florida was actually around orange groves. So growing up, there were had some family who had orange groves. So like that was my exposure to agriculture. So going to living in this tradition. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you, what was your strongest impression of China? You know, coming from Florida, coming from the US, what was your strongest impression of China?
I think China is a much more, I know this sounds crazy, but it's actually a more humane place. And by humane, I mean there's more humanity there. And by humanity, I mean there's like a lot of people. And so it's easy in the US. You can, go to your little house in the suburbs, get in your car, drive to work. You can go your whole life without interacting with people. You can just be in your little container. But in China, there's no hiding. Everybody's everywhere. So it forces you to interact with people, and by meeting more people, you get more reflection on who you are as well. So my first impression and biggest impression is there is more humanity there. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but that was my impression. And so so I'm in this village, and basically I integrate into life there. I integrate into society. I have friends, learn a little bit of the local dialect. But most importantly is I get in tune with the seasons. By seasons, I mean like the change in weather, the cultural processes. Like, for example, one time of year when the rice is about to be harvested, all of these grasshoppers come, and there's like just like an invasion of grasshoppers. So during the day, they're all jumping around everywhere. But at night, the grasshoppers go to the tops of the rice stalks to sleep. So at night, the villagers will go in with like a flashlight and a bag, and they'll just throw all these grasshoppers in a sock or in the bag, bring it back home, and then they cook it in a wok. So like there's like a seasonal delicacy of grasshopper eating. And then there's also like community rituals for like births, weddings, and funerals. They'll do something where they'll basically have a big party, invite everybody in the village, and each family that comes gives a red envelope. And inside the red envelope is a certain amount of money. And when you enter into the party, there's somebody at the door seated at a table with a ledger open, and everybody who gives money, they write it down. So in fact, they have an open distributed ledger, analog ledger, but everybody in the village knows how much everybody has given at all times. So there's this kind of like real-time accounting of who owes who to what. And so if you have a death in the family and then it's a funeral and people come and give money to help with that process, this is like kind of that reciprocal solidarity that you don't find in these newer communities. And by newer communities, I'm talking about the US is like there's no memory. There's no incentive to remember anything from the past because it's such a present consumer culture that you don't have any legacy because it just gets like bulldozed or like turned into a strip mall or like luxury villas, whatever. And unfortunately, I saw that process happening in rural China where you're going from rice farm to now there's more tourism, more people want to move here. So now we're going to put luxury villas on the rice farm. So I was kind of mortified to see the same process happening in China with they were importing American consumer culture while exporting the manufacturing. So there's this like whole crazy, like if you look into the evolution of how did the US outsource and offshore their manufacturing, first through Taiwan in the 70s and 80s, like with refrigerators and microwaves. And then in the 90s and when China opened up, then that switched over. And we can even look back to like, why is the semiconductor industry in Taiwan? And so there's a history here. So yeah, and it's, not everybody has to be like a East Asia scholar or anything like that, but there has been like a willing ignorance on the West to just not realize any type of reality, and that ignorance gets played on by politicians, and you can see Trump, who like is just such a clown, who he can use both the China as a boogeyman while he's making his ties and other memorabilia in China. So we have like an upside down insane world, clown town. And it's just, it takes, I mean, what does it take to be sane in an insane world? I think that's kind of where we're at right now, or where we have been for a long time. So what is a sane solution to this situation? And I'll bring it all the way back to this bioregional nation network that I discovered permaculture around 2013 when I was living in San Francisco. So I ended 4 years in China. Like, okay, I've basically gone down to the bottom, can't go any lower. I'm already in like the bottom of the rice paddy. So after 4 years, I realized, okay, it's time to come back to the U.S. Like, let's reorient. So I come back to the U.S. 2012, and the economy was still dead. Like, even though I had fantastic work experience, I had a degree. My China experience meant zero in the U.S. And even worse, I'm in like Miami trying to look for a job, and there's no Asian people in Miami like 2012. Like, it's not like nobody's speaking Mandarin. So I couldn't even find a job.
So you came back to that reality in the U.S. In San Francisco, and I'm wondering how did those experiences led lead to Web3 and refi?
Right. So 2013 was kind of like the social mobile explosion of Web 2. So, uh, so Web 1, like we're thinking AOL, we're thinking like dial up. Like this is where I grew up, like in my early years, my like from 5 to 15 years old is Web 1. And then college, we get Web 2 with like Facebook and MySpace. And then by the time I get to San Francisco in 2013, it's pretty much like the mobile apps. So that's what was the big thing then. So that's where I got really exposed to, okay, how does the industry work from a Web 2 perspective? And I mean, this was even before like anybody was really talking about crypto. Um, so I was working in San Francisco at a Mexican restaurant and in a Cantonese neighborhood, which is really funny. Uh, and then I was doing permaculture, and I was working at this urban. It was called the Urban Farmer Store, which I thought it was for farmers, but turns out it's actually just for like irrigation professionals. which was great because I got to learn everything about water. I learned everything there is about how to install irrigation systems, how to do rainwater systems, how to do gray water systems. And San Francisco is like considered like one of the most like green cities, or at least there was a tradition of like the hippies. Then they turned into like eco warriors. Like so, there San Francisco has that element. So I got to get really exposed to that culture and to those methods there. And then after a year in San Francisco, I felt like I had reintegrated. Okay, I'm like kind of like caught up to speed on what's happening in the U.S. And I wanted to take what I learned in San Francisco and take it to the Chinese San Francisco, which is Shenzhen. And so I moved to Shenzhen because I had a friend there, um, and I basically had all of these ideas for startups. So I moved back to Shenzhen, and I do a startup weekend, which is like a hackathon where you go in, everybody pitches some ideas, teams form, and then within 48 hours you're supposed to like pitch to judges. Maybe you have like a prototype of the app, but what they really care about is a business model. So my idea was a social food app where people could create social dinners, and people could join dinners because in these big cities in China where you have a huge influx. So okay, so the largest migration in human history has actually been from the Chinese countryside to the city over the last 40 years. So in China, everything is very family, clan based, village based. So when you move to a city, you have no connections. You're just going to go work at a factory or get your office job, whatever it is. There's no way to really make friends. But China has such a huge food culture that this is the way that people connect. So in a place like Shenzhen, where you have like all these new young people and everybody's struggling to like make a social circle, eating was like the way to like meet people. So we ended up starting this app, and had a lot of fun developing it, and we did a lot of dinners. So it was like one of my first real kind of like app startups with like community organizing with kind of like a sustainability angle. And so I did that for about a year, and halfway through the year, I got a call from my mother, and she said she got diagnosed with cancer. And so, anyways, that started a whole long process of me putting my life on hold, and then I eventually like had to leave Shenzhen, and I went back to San Francisco to be with my sister. And so we were like, me and my sister are kind of co-managing my mom, who's getting her cancer treatment in Florida. And so I'm go back to San Francisco, find a job at Facebook doing contract work, like on the content farm. I don't know. I don't think I'm under any legal, like, I don't think I'm in any like NDA, but anyways, long story short, the Facebook culture was just like totally like dead, like totally vanilla. Like it was funny because it's also, if you look at like indoctrination in China and indoctrination in like Facebook workplace, it's pretty much the same thing. Where everybody is incentivized to be as generic as possible, like no independent thinking, no like any type of like critical thought. It was just yeah, just all of your basic needs are met. And this was 2015, which was like the height of Facebook's like popularity, like Web 2, like uh, if you think back to like what was that company that did Cambridge Analytica, right? So that was at the like while all that stuff was going down during the 2015 campaign election, where you had Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Like, so Facebook was used as a weapon, kind of weaponized for social control over this like political process. So I'm working at Facebook in Palo Alto in South Bay. Meanwhile, I'm taking the bus up to the city at night to attend like crypto conferences, crypto meetups. So 2015, 2016 was like a really cool time to be in the Bay Area because it was when a lot of these like crypto, like Web3 startups, and Web3 didn't exist in 2016. It was still like crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin. And then Ethereum was like just getting started. So it was a great time to just get like really good basic crypto fundamentals. Like they were even talking about like ZK snarks back then. So it's kind of like we've been on this road for a long time.
Yes, and what attracted you? What was that attracted you to Web3 and crypto?
Well, it was just it was the Okay, so I'll turn the clock back a little bit. When I was in Shenzhen, I attended a meetup where there was like a Israeli cybersecurity expert basically giving a talk on crypto, and this was 2014. So it was like after the MT Gox hack, like crypto was like in a bear market. Like this was like bear market 1.5 or something. So then I'm looking into use cases, and the idea of you can connect a smart contract to like an IoT connected device, and then they can talk to each other. And I'm thinking, okay, how can we deploy this for actual environmental ecosystem purposes? So my first use case was a smart washing machine that like recycles the water. That was like my first iteration of like, okay, how can we use IoT Web3 crypto economics for a water economy? Um, so so 2015 wraps up. Facebook was like, I had a year contract. After 6 months, I'm like, I can't. You guys are driving me crazy. I'm out of here. I ended up going to work for a Shenzhen-based IoT small batch hardware manufacturer called C Studios, helping them set up their San Francisco office. So I basically got like a 3-month crash course in like hardware manufacturing, which was like critical to understand how that process works from start to finish. Unfortunately, the situation with my mother continued to deteriorate to the point where I had to move back to Florida to take care of her. So going through this like death, like as if your mother dies, like that's a part of you dies as well. But that also brings a rebirth opportunity. So going through chemo and like it's such a painful process, and the whole time, like it was one of these things where she had the best insurance, like because through her job she had the best insurance she could get. But it was actually a double-edged sword because that means she got more chemo, which was painful, and then the doctors were just totally useless. So you're going through this like excruciating like life moment with your mother dying, and you're having to go through like the U.S. healthcare and insurance system, which is like just as painful. So by the end, it was like you want the person to rest in peace and not be in pain anymore. So she ended up passing in the spring of 2016, and after that, it was like, okay, relief. Like, okay, like we can rest. Like, because I couldn't like during that time there was a 2-year period where basically from when she was diagnosed to when she passed was 2 years. So there's 2 years of a dark time where you couldn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Like it was a dark time. Like it was very hard to be truly happy. So after she passed, it's like the clouds lifted, the light shone. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how did that experience shape your view?
Oh well, I mean, the best thing that kids can do to honor their parents is to live their happiest life. And I think after that, going through that experience, one is how do I want to live? How you die is how you live. So after she passed away is when I decided to go full time with this idea that I had for this IoT blockchain rainwater startup. So I said, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to like dedicate to do this startup, and I ended up building a few prototypes in Florida, and ended up traveling to Guatemala, did an install there, traveled over 4 years, basically going on this startup journey, and ended up writing a blue paper. And so this is like still very early days. This is 2016, 2017 into 2018, where I'm talking about crypto and permaculture. Nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. Um, Meanwhile, we're like actually installing these gardens, putting in these like computers, like this whole like the whole thing. And meanwhile, I'm pitching VCs, and nobody sees the value proposition. So 20 so we arrived at 2019, and it's like kind of the bear market again, and I kind of got to the point where okay, I need to put this on hold. And so I end up going back to San Francisco, and I find a job managing a blockchain co-working space called Starfish. And Starfish was kind of like the Switzerland or like the neutral ground in San Francisco, where during the day it was co-working space, but at night it was crypto meetup event space. And so every developer was coming in, talking about the new protocols, the new blockchains, the DeFi. I mean, this was 2019, so like Uniswap just launched, and it was like very early DeFi days. So it was great to get all of this alpha and to like meet all these developers and to meet the community. And it's just kind of funny because fast forward 4 years and it's like, these people are still like, everybody's still like hustling and grinding it out. So, so 2019 was interesting. And then after 6 months of working at the co-working space, I'm like, you know what? I've had enough. I'm okay. Oh, wait, hold on. I skipped something. 2017, I went to Europe. It was my first Europe trip, and I did I started off my first time to Europe. I went directly to Barcelona in August and spent the month there. And it's like
Somewhere in Barcelona.
I don't know. Have you been to Barcelona in August?
Yes, I have.
It is like the hottest, sexiest place to be on the planet. And it was like, whoa, like wow, what have I been doing with my life? So I get there and just really love it. And I ended up meeting up with my sister, and the whole purpose for that trip was my mother's dying wish was to have her ashes spread in Spain. And it's like, okay, cool. Like this is gonna be like one wild family trip. So my sister comes and meets me, and it's my cousin too, and we go. We find a beautiful like beachside place to spread the ashes, and it was like kind of like another chapter closing. It's like, okay, this is done. And it was another thing where it's like, okay, we can move forward with our life now.
And
so after that, end up, yeah.
You have European roots, right?
Yeah, so I can. So it's interesting. I've looked back. I mean, growing up, everybody just gets totally homogenized in U.S. Like everybody's like, we're taught to treat everybody the same. Like no post race, like everybody's the same. But of course, like it's not. So growing up, I remember there being like the cultural moments were around the holidays and family dinners because the food culture got passed down through my father's side. And my father's side is Sicilian. And so like we'd have cannoli for Christmas and we'd have lasagna and like, food was a big deal. So what I inherited was the food culture. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit the language, even though my grandfather spoke Sicilian, which I didn't even know like until I was an adult. Um, so my mother's maiden name is Pena.
And do you speak it right now?
Yes, I'm functional. I'm functional in Italian. It's just there's enough languages floating around in my brain where it's more of I would rather just do sign language. Like I found that the less speaking, the better. But no, there's so many ways to communicate. I think that's what's so funny is.
Yeah, sometimes that's the best communication. Yeah.
Well, exactly. What do we actually want to do? I think getting people with shared values, like if you don't have shared values, no amount of communication is going to really get you to where you want to go. So luckily for me, I was able to understand. So I should also mention that I studied linguistic anthropology in college.
Okay.
And that opened up a whole new world for me in terms of what does language actually mean and what is its role. So you follow me on Twitter, so you can you've noticed that like my writing style is very I don't know, how would you describe my writing style?
I don't know. I'm missing words.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's like exactly. I'm missing words.
Well, I'm kind of curious because I use it more of a I do Twitter more for my own personal entertainment. Like I find it's where I go to like get my it's like me telling jokes into the mirror. Like I'm laughing. If it makes me laugh, I share it.
Yeah, I would say the word I would use. I don't know if it's ludic. I think that would be the word that
Ludic or lucid?
use. Ludic, and also lucid, but ludic like playful.
Ah, okay. Yes, exactly. And I think, these are such heavy topics. Like when you talk about finance, economics, geopolitics, like all of these like really heavy subjects, remembering the lightness and kind of bringing in a little bit of levity into the situation actually helps us to get to the the real, what are we
Yes.
trying to really say here? The one of the other things I learned in China is because the situation over there can be so like heavy, like we're talking uh, what China went through in the 20th century was really intense, from Japanese occupation to famines to like political unrest, like you name it, like they went through it. So when you're in that culture and you realize that people actually have a funny, dark sense of humor, it's like, that actually helps. That helps ease the pain. I a quote that I like is, "Comedy is just tragedy with time added," and I think that helps to kind of go through the day-to-day process. And I know Venezuela has had a very painful recent past that it's still trying to reconcile. And do you see like are
Hmm.
people like using comedy to like
Yeah, and
kind
that's,
of help?
oh man, for sure, 100%. Venezuela is a country that, yeah, has been, it has been hit hard, but Venezuelans have something great that I feel that we're all alchemists in a way. We are chaos magicians, and we can turn shit into gold. That's what I feel, and that we do with humor, with a great sense of humor. And sometimes people don't understand that, because people think that we must be sad, and we should be sad, and we should be with all this heaviness. But that's not what happens, and I think that's what actually saves us. The humor, the good humor, the good vibes of the Venezuelan. I think it's also about the Caribbean. The Caribbean gives that to us, I think.
So yes, that was. I mean, yeah, it's a very therapeutic lifesaver, and I think yeah, just the even though Twitter's turning or whatever X, like it's just like we all know it's going down the drain, and that's okay. Like we can accept that, and there will be another social media channel, and like we'll still keep in touch, and it's fine. Like we need to go through this kind of like death and reconciliation process with like Web 2 social media. I feel like that's another thing that's been holding the crypto blockchain movement back, is we've been stuck on the Web 2 socials. And I think we're going to start to see in this next cycle, more and more people are going to be onboarding into kind of like the sovereign profile, like you can own your profile. And um, I want to say, yeah, I think that crypto is at a inflection point now where we have to take, now that the infrastructure is built, we have to start deploying real world use cases. Like it has to start making sense in the real world. And I think Venezuela is interesting because people I talk to, they're using what, Tether or USDT, or
Yes, exactly.
like people are actually using crypto as a form of payment in Venezuela because the bolivar is just crashed. And this is what happens when you have a currency that's based off of fossil fuel. Like it doesn't, it's not gonna, it's not long term sustainable. And I think we have to. Mm,
Yes, I think that Venezuela and actually Latin America has like the perfect environment for adoption of this technology. Yeah, due to all the political madness and all the economic hardships that we've going through. Yes, this is like a perfect environment for this technology to arise.
well, I think the real flippening is going to be the global South actually is able to create the new social, economic, ecological paradigm that the North can't, because the North hasn't gone through that level of like, one, there hasn't been like, if you ask why do you need
Hmm.
crypto, like I already have like 5 bank accounts like in the US, like people don't get the use case.
Yeah.
Also, there is, the cultures are more connected to nature and to these kind of longer wisdom traditions in the South that the North just has totally lost. So I think there's going to be
Yes, I like to see it as an integration. I always go back to the prophecy of the eagle and the
mhm.
condor. the eagle representing the north and the condor representing the south. And that's how I view it. They are going to meet up and they are going to unite forces, so to speak. And that's when a real big change is going to happen. So we're going to integrate what the North has, and we're going to integrate what the South has. And um, overall, we need to stop thinking that we're separate from nature. I think that's when it's going to really make a big change in people's lives, in people's minds, when we stop believing that we are detached from nature, which I think it's such a problem of a fundamental issue, you know?
Oh, definitely. Well, I agree that there will be an integration and a balance. I also think that there will be more turmoil before we get there, and not to say that that's like, I mean, these are cycles, right? These are human cycles. There's been, um, if you look, I guess it's kind of funny because we think like, okay, we humans have been around for a couple thousand years. We have like some history, but beyond prehistory, like we don't know how far back it goes. Like we could be going through like the hundredth bear market. Like we don't know how long we've been doing this. So I think kind of also accepting time as nonlinear is also another theme that comes up in my life. And just going back to kind of, we're going back in the story, 2017, traveling through Europe. Um, I end up in Italy, and yeah, I really like it. I get out of the airport in Rome. I'm like, this guy looks like my uncle. Oh, that guy looks like my uncle too. I'm like, why is there everybody looks like me?
Was that the first time your trip to Barcelona for your mom? Was that your first trip to Europe?
Yes, that was my first trip, and I always thought like, because in my 20s, I'm like, okay, I'm like backpacker, like low no income, like shoestring budget. I'll go to Europe when I'm older and I have money. And turns out, okay, I'm 30 and I go to Europe, and I'm like, okay, it's actually, this is really cool. In terms of like just seeing the amount of history, the amount of culture. Also, like the U.S. is like kind of Europe 2.0 in terms of like kind of seeing where some of the traditions come from. And yeah, when I get to Italy, I'm having like, okay, I could. And this is 2017. Like Trump went into office in January of 2017, and that was kind of like everybody's like really really nervous. And it was really strange too because there's a lot of people who really like Trump in the US. Like they think that this guy is like the best. And I had a lot of family members who were very pro Trump because he was offering lower taxes. Like he's a businessman, but it was such a sham. And so that was kind of like really thinking of, okay, if I were to leave the US, where would I go? And when I got to Italy, I really, enjoyed it. And this is North Italy too. I'm like in Rome and up in like Treviso, like and I'm thinking, I knew that you could get Italian citizenship through heritage. So after that trip was over, I go back visit my grandmother in Kentucky, and she had all the family records. So it's like, okay, I can see like how this could work. But there was only one problem, is that I had to get new copies of the records, and I needed to get like 4 generations worth of paperwork. So that whole process took about 2 years, and so I ended up going back uh, to Sicily in 2000. Well, I went back to Italy, and then I went to Sicily for the first time in 2019 because I had to go get my great grandfather's birth certificate to kind of complete that process. So I spend the summer in Sicily, getting back to the roots, exploring this island, and just being like, wow, this place is awesome. I love it here. And so I do a whole tour of the island, and I still had like another 2 months I could spend. And I'm on Facebook, and I see that this guy is like, hey, we're doing a reforestation project if anybody wants to come help. So immediately, like I type, like, "Yep, I'm on it." So I end up going and staying for 6 weeks, and we do this. I had just so this is like ecosystem restoration camps started like I think 2018, 2019, and if you're like in the permaculture like circles in that community, you kind of like know what people are doing around the world. So everybody's kind of like sharing tips and like what's new. So ecosystem restoration camps was this new idea. I mean, not like it's an old practice, new implementation where you say you have this like degraded landscape, you bring a camp of people, and then they're basically like the pioneers. And then over time, you can restore the landscape through these camps. And then let's build a network of these camps. So ecosystem restoration camps was like an inspiration to do a seed ball camp here in Sicily back in 2019 because it was affected from these fires. And so what happens is every summer the fires come through Sicily and like burn everybody's olive groves down. Everybody's all upset, and then the government can't like making excuses, and then summer's over, everybody forgets, rains come, and then summer comes back again. Oh, same thing, fires. Oh wait, we didn't have a solution. Oh shit, we're like so it kind of got to the point where we have to do something different. So 2019, we brought in this guy Kutlahan, who is this Turkish Kurdish guy who now lives in Italy practicing natural farming, doing workshops. He came down and we had like kind of our first prototype ecosystem restoration camp. And so it went really well. We got, I don't know, 40 people over 2 weeks. And I had my grandfather donated a little bit of money so that we could buy a cement mixer so that we can make more seed balls. And then this was kind of like that first like regenerative finance, like, okay, money towards regeneration. Like that's pretty simple concept, right? So this was like when it kind of all the pieces started to come together. So the summer ends, I go back to the US, and
What is it that makes you believe in Web3?
I believe in the potential of human creativity. And I think what we really need is just for it's. I should also mention, like I've been on a yogic journey for 15 years now. And the purpose of yoga is to create a balance between your energies and your life purpose, your dharma, so to speak. And so everybody has a purpose. You incarnate into this life, and your soul has a purpose. Now, is your soul able to express itself freely? If not, are you like what is holding you back? And you could say, okay, well, there's external factors. You're in an oppressive government, or you're like in a depressed economy, like that's keeping you back from reaching your full potential. But you could also say maybe it's internal development. Am I at peace with myself? Am I giving myself the self-care and self-love that I need so that I can express myself? And so what I see as crypto economics is an expression of creative intelligence that allows people to both individually express themselves as well as to collectively express themselves. So as an economist who's had these really stupid tools like dollars and bonds and like, this legacy system that's like really heavy and not really flexible, the crypto world, the Web3 world, and this is just an extension of the internet collective consciousness, actually enables people to express themselves more freely. So you can give a developer in Venezuela can do more creative things than they could before. And it's not just like an individual, but Web3 is a community.
Yeah.
And Web3 is just like such a silly term.
Yeah, it's definitely a technology for creation.
And I think what we really need to create is community.
Why is it a silly term?
Oh, well, I don't think it's accurate. I mean, because some people use Web 2.5. It's a spectrum. What is it? Like, are we Web 3.1 too? Like, what? So I think just understanding the concepts, um, and like, I think that's the problem too, is people don't even understand how Web 2 works. How are they going to understand how Web 3 works? So what we're doing right now is, so we're trying to create systems of new value creation and value exchange. And that's determined by both what do individuals value versus what do communities value, what is the value of ecology, so there's all of these different ways to subjectively look at value, while at the same time we have this planetary crisis of ecosystem collapse uh, that is actually forcing us to figure out how do we provide and sustain human life on planet Earth. So we have this new challenge, planetary coordination challenge, which can't be done from the top down. It can only be done from the grassroots bottom up, because as much as individuals want to self-actualize and express themselves, planet Earth also wants to self-actualize and express herself. So now we get into this like
Yeah.
planetary singularity space where do I end and Earth begins, or like is Earth like just a little tiny molecule in the bigger galactic whole? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
we're integrating multiple levels of consciousness into our daily lives. And
Yes.
of course, like, most, I don't know, maybe some of the more San Francisco crypto communities are a little bit more out there on the on that tip, but for most of the time, people in the crypto space are not talking about these kinds of things. But I think it's totally critical that we incorporate it into our understanding of what these technical software tools mean as we are integrating more into our biological systems.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I consider to be really important, which is local impact. Yes, we have all this technology. Yes, we have like these sort of floating nations, so to speak, but how does that translate to the local community? How does that translate to the earth? I want to ask you.
Well, you've
Uh-huh.
probably seen me ranting about like network states.
Yeah, I've seen you. I've seen you.
Well, I think it's one of these things where we have to we have to bring it down to reality. We got to like agree on what is base reality. Like, we can't just be like escaping into the digital cloud.
Mhm.
And as much as like network states as like, okay, great, I get it. Sensors, there's like integrated digital IDs. There's like, we want that, but we want it in a way that it is from the bottom up, grounded in real community and real ecosystems, not uh, a millionaire billionaire fantasy escape plan. And I think that's what most of it is, this kind of like easily you can just turn it into another dictatorship. Like, so what are the systems that we need to have in place where that's not even a possibility?
Yeah. So what's your take with network states? What I feel is that you, I mean, the word state gives me that vibe of that I have to subscribe to, a way of being or a way of doing things. What's your take on it?
Well, yeah, so we have so how do we okay, so this is really interesting because we have two things happening here. We have the political state, which has traditionally been top down, monopoly on violence. Basically, the market exists to prop up the military, and so we have this kind of like traditional state like definition. Meanwhile, we have a new definition of state, which is what's called in software and computer sciences, we have like global state, or like what is the database, like where are the bits, like where is it, like, so the whole point behind distributed ledgers is that everybody can agree on what is the state of the database. And so now we have this new definition that we can play with, and at the same time we have what, like with refi, which is ecological accounting. So what we really want in a network state is eco state. We want to be able to have a broad access and equity over the eco state. And we can use these smart contracts, distributed ledgers, like you name it, to help us to collectively govern the commons. And I think that's kind of where the conversation gets lost, because nobody's talking about nature and network states. Everybody's talking about, well, we can do this technical thing, and like we can like the the latest news is SBF's brother wanted to buy a island so they can engineer the master race. Like, it's like, what is this? And also, too, I think this is kind of like the brain rot that's happening in San Francisco. And I'm just using San Francisco as like the easiest, like, kind of example of this kind of thinking, where they're so like the people who are making these, like, uh, a lot of these really important social technologies are so detached from reality because they've made so much money that there's really like two societies. In San Francisco, it's like either you're working in tech and you can make enough money to live there, or you're like an underling and you're working like your wage jobs and like living like 10 people in a house. So you very much had a dual society, and that's what network states and Balaji's uh, framework represents. It's just you're basically creating two societies, and the people who don't have the technical ability or the financial resources are automatically getting lumped in the bottom and getting exploited. And we see that with the orb. Same thing happening. It's the same mindset that thinks that you can bring in the VC funding, deploy the tech, and then just extract. And I think we're getting to the point where,
How do you think we can bridge that gap?
well, that's that. Well, I'm glad you asked that question because there's only one way to find out. So that's what we're doing here. And so yeah, let me we can go back to the future, 2022, and we had both DevCon and Cosmoverse in Colombia, and at the same time, Joe Brewer and this town in Colombia called Barichara, where he's doing his work, basically like cultural evolutionary work, and how do we organize humans towards planetary regeneration. So he's been on the ground doing the work in Colombia for a few years. All the crypto events are coming to Colombia, and I'm like, hey, we should do a refi event. Like regenerative finance is blown up after DeFi summer 2020. Now we have like carbon credits on chain, which is like the least interesting, least imaginative application of refi. So the idea is, okay, can we bring refi builders to this town in Colombia and partner them and integrate with the community on the ground who's doing the regenerative practices? So if it's Syntropic agroforestry, or if it's doing like food sovereignty. So we did a 5-day event. We had like 6 weeks to pull this off. We did a 5-day event. We had about 60 people participate, and it wasn't even about the tech. Like, tech was like the thing we talked about the least. It was more about understanding the culture, understanding the landscapes, and what we were doing was trying to model what does a bioregional economy look like. And of course, it has to start with the culture and start with the trust that the people are building on the ground. And then from there, we can start to integrate and look at, okay, well, where do eco credits make sense? Or like, where does funding for like a school make sense? And so thinking of regenerative finance as in how to kickstart, bootstrap a bioregional economy where the people on the ground are the ones that are the drivers of that change. And so that went really well. There was so much energy that afterwards, it's like, how do you keep building on that momentum? And then I wasn't like, that's not my home. That's not where I live. So I left back to my home here in Sicily. And it's like, okay, how do we adapt it to this context in creating a Mediterranean bioregional economy? And the fires are a perfect example of a change agent that's forcing people to adapt. And so now we are hosting a main event, Refi Sicilia, and trying to explain regenerative finance in Italian here in this local context was just totally not working. Like, people were just totally not getting it. But when I say refi, in Italian, rifai means to do over, rifare. So to refi means to do over again, which makes sense to people because they're like, yeah, man, this, because everything's already broken here. Like, it's already like, it really has to be, everything's got to be done over. And that's another thing too, is the place where the most possibility of regeneration is the place that have been degenerated the most. And like Sicily's been occupied for like millennia. So it's been like generations and generations of extraction and exploitation, to the point where after after World War I, or even before that, like people were leaving by the boatload. And so you have this huge migration exodus that's still continuing to this day, where now you have the EU, people can go work in Berlin or Barcelona, wherever. So you have this brain drain leaving the island. Meanwhile, you have uh, abandoned villages, massive amounts of farmland, which getting to the point now where the economics are breaking, where it costs you more money to do the harvest than the money that you would get. So there's a perfect setting here for reimagining what does a bioregional economy look like, and how we are implementing that is, I'm out here in the countryside and we have local network of family farms. So we're basically organizing these work parties, and we're using an NFT ticketing platform to manage these events. So the people that come and do the work also are getting an NFT, and that's giving us a public accounting system to say who's actually contributing. And so the whole point is, how are we interpreting and making sense of this data, both digitally as well as like going back to that story in China with the red envelopes, because a lot of the motivation is not from, oh, I need money. It's more of, I want to be a part of a community and I want to actually participate. My heart wants to regenerate. I want to be involved in these projects. But you know how hard it is to like regenerate full time? Like there's no full time regeneration job. It just doesn't exist. Like dollars do not support full time regenerative work. So we're having to develop a complementary economy, an informal economy that we can then eventually formalize and digitize. So we're first starting with what actually needs to happen on the ground. And then instead of networking, we are work netting. We're casting a net to find people who want to come and work voluntarily. And then when the harvest comes, then we can share in the rewards. And I think that's like the shift that we have to go from. And you know, like my kind of like radical position is that the only jobs in the future will be jobs that are regenerating ecosystems. Like that's the only thing that people are going to be doing, because it's the only thing that people can do to survive. So transitioning to this regenerative economy actually is, how do we step into more like a fuller life? So we've been doing these work parties for the last few weeks. And it wasn't like, I didn't plan this either. It's like, okay, we should do this big event in October because that's when the olive harvest is, and that's when we need all of the people. And then through the Refi Italia network, we came in contact with a developer who's on the other side of the island, who has this NFT ticketing platform called Migo. And so out of the kindness of his heart, he said, okay, we'll build you a website and we'll host the event like on the website. So we already like are receiving gifts. And now we have this like really powerful platform, and at the same time we have these like really powerful fires that are forcing people to wake up and to act and to ask, what can I do? And it's just like crazy timing to say, whoa, this is convenient because we have all of this work that needs to get done in the countryside. Meanwhile, everybody's like in the city all cramped up. There was a discarica, a dump, like a trash dump that caught on fire, which released all of this toxic chemical into the air. So the people in the city like couldn't go outside. And so these are kind of like these compound crises that happen. Hey, guard dog. Hey, what's going on? Anyways, I think they're
How has people received the technology? You know, as you said, it's people that is used to work in the land, and how has that, how is that bridge? How is that gap?
well, it's actually well, it's funny because these are young people who are coming and participating. So there's like the last the last remnants of like the last holdouts who are still like trying to make a way, because there's no like trying to go and live in Palermo, like Palermo is a crazy town, or like leaving outside to go work, like that's not what the people want to do. So the people who want to stay and want to work the land, and they like they want to do it, it's like, how do we find a way forward? So we've gathered the tribe. In fact, we are gathering the tribes because we're basically doing it on a village by village basis, where we are going. Some people from one village will come and help us one day, and then like next week we'll go to their village. And now word has spread so that somebody on the other side of the island has basically come to us to ask how like they can basically get onboarded. So the meme is starting to go viral where it's like, oh, you can get people to come to work on my farm when there's like no labor market around. Like there's nobody around to work on the farm. The only people who are working on the farms are Romanians and Africans and Syrians getting like 10 euros an hour. Like what, like that's even a lot. So you have this like really weird warped labor market. Meanwhile, the local people, the young people who want to like do the regenerative projects, do the homesteads, do the eco villages, they don't have the people to do it. So now, because we have a digital social coordination tool, we can actually bring in the people at the right place at the right time and get a digital record of an open public digital record of those experiences. So now we start to get into like impact DAOs, hyper certs, eco credits, community currencies, mutual credit. So it opens up a whole new design space of what we can do because we have a community that trusts each other and has shared values.
Beautiful.
And we're actually producing like actual utility because we're harvesting pistachio, we're harvesting olive, we're making wine, like we're doing all of these regenerative agricultural practices while creating actual value that can be traded or sold into a marketplace. So I think that's we are like the vortex is pulling all of these things together in a very organic, emergent way that there's no top-down planning could have predicted or executed on.
Sounds beautiful. And what would you say is the biggest challenge you face?
I think the biggest challenge um, is getting more people in the Web3 world, crypto, to actually pay attention to real world use cases. Everybody's just too focused on infrastructure, and I've been in this game for so long trying to get people to pay attention, and it's like, well, no, there's no VC funding here. There's no there's no exit. There's no like you're not gonna do an IPO here. But at the same time, this is where the value is. This is where the value creation is. So I think what we're going to see over this next cycle is a lot of these like, and it's beautiful too, because I see all these other refi projects that are getting traction, that are succeeding, that are getting their MVPs out there and building. And so this next cycle, we're going to see a huge growth that all of the roots that have been kind of going down deep are now going to be flowering and blossoming this next coming cycle, so that people are saying, oh, crypto actually does have a real world use. Oh, wow, this is where the users are. It's not like in the degen gamblers killing themselves,
It actually
literally and
works.
figuratively. Yeah. And I think now we're finally getting to, because we can't build this system for the old world. Like we're not, that's not what we're here for. So we're having to build a new world that we can't like, it has to be a miracle, because if we say, okay, this is what it's going to be, it's not, it's not, the universe will always surprise us. Like inconceivable, but looking back, it was inevitable. Like it always happens like that. So we're kind of in the special place where miracles happen, and a lot of it is just like, can we be patient enough with the process?
Beautiful. And Antonio, you mentioned your yoga journey and you mentioned Dharma and purpose. I want to ask you, what is your purpose?
Well, I think the goal here is I'm an able-bodied white man, so I'm the most privileged person kind of in the whole scheme of things. So for me, I want to use my energy, my body, my resources to help other people who may not be as privileged as I am, and that is specifically focused on regenerating ecosystems, because that's what we all need to live. So if we're able to make ecosystems thrive, we can make people thrive, make communities thrive, because the whole point is the universe wants to make it beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So we can make it more beautiful.
Yeah, more game B and less game A.
So I guess I'm more like an artist. I think we're all artists. I think my palette is more of the social. How do communities integrate their cultures with ecological cycles? And that's where we find ourselves at right now, is our society has not integrated itself. So we have to reintegrate society. So I think that's the um, long-term road on the road to regeneration. And yeah, I think having fun with it and enjoying the everyday is kind of the task.
Beautiful. I also believe that we are all artists and we are like these torches lighting up other torches. So, is there any other belief, whether it is philosophical or spiritual or religious, that has shaped your thought?
Well, the time in China was really informative because I got exposed to kind of non-duality, both in Buddhist culture and Taoism, and it's kind of funny now, like learning about Taoism before DAOs, like the governance framework, was really interesting because DAOs, like, great, like it's a way to practice Taoism, like doing non-doing. And so for me, that has been my interpretation of this software, is how do we embrace that non-duality, because it is both digital, it is analog, it is one, it is zero, it is all of that. So I think you have to really thrive in this space. You cannot hold on to any one reality too closely. Um, Meanwhile, if we can look at the true nature of reality, going back to this harmonizing society with ecological cycles, this bioregional planetary network of interoperable commons, now we can start to see a little bit of a shape, a little bit of an outline of what the future may look like. And the idea is, can we bring land that has been privatized and exploited, can we bring it back into common stewardship so that we can rehydrate, restore ecosystems at the scale necessary? And that was the challenge I ran into with the rainwater startup. Is we were looking at doing watershed utility grids, but it's really difficult to do that when everybody's on their own little island. Metaphorically speaking, everybody's in their own little house, their own little mortgage, or in a little cubicle in an apartment, and it's really hard to do regenerative work in that space. Like, it's not the right mind space. That's not conducive to the human flourishing and the social networks that you need.
Yeah.
But now we can say, okay, we have uh,
Without a sense of community, right?
yes, and also too, like, how do we equitably share all of these different resources among people? And this is where we get into the work netting bioregions as opposed to the network state. Is we have to make sure that there's enough to go around to meet everybody's needs. So of course, there's more than enough. Nature always provides, but it's going to require a different paradigm than this private, corporate, uh, top-down, extraction-based economy. And so we can put one of the options and one of the pathways forward is what's called an earth bank, where you can take individual land titles, put them into a community land trust. So you basically have a portfolio of land, and then that is helping to collateralize your economy. And so you can play around with some of these, like, crypto economic token engineering design frameworks by using natural capital, social capital, cultural capital, experiential capital. So we basically imagine you only had red, blue, and green, but now we have like so many more colors to play with. And I think that's like the exciting part, but it requires an opening of the mind to see it in that way. And permaculture helps us to look, uh, uh, we can see through nature's eyes as we design our human cultural systems.
Yeah, it turns out.
And if you go and read the permaculture designer's manual, which was written in the 1980s, and it basically outlines how to organize a planetary network of bioregions. But in the 1980s, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have distributed ledger technology, they didn't have smart contracts, they didn't have uh, DAOs, they didn't have any of this stuff. So now we actually have the social coordination tools to implement this um, this this framework. And I think that's been almost kind of like shouting into the void of, oh, we have the solution, but it's like nobody wants to actually have a solution. People want to keep making up problems. So that is
Yeah, it's necessary that more people jump into it, right?
right. And we are, I think this is what is called in anthropological terms, it's called a community of practice. And I think we need to go from individual users to communities of practice to really unleash the power of this digital technology.
Beautiful. And yeah, always making sure we're doing local impact. I think that's also important to not stay in this digital cloud, as you said. So, Antonio, we're getting closer to the end, and with Web3 Roots, something that I am aiming to do is to sort of craft a narrative for what it is to be a region. And I want to ask you what it is for you to be a region.
To be a region means to live regeneratively. And to do that, I think you have to both um, be in balance with yourself and be in balance and right relationship with your surroundings. So I think there's different ways regeneration takes many forms. So it could be installing a rainwater system, or it could be like caring for an elder. It could be, community garden. It could be a community currency. But I think living regeneratively means that we have to be like embrace our interdependencies. And one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, has this idea called interbeing, and that I think is the essence of regeneration. Is that cloud I can see also as the ocean, also as the water running through me, and starting to see the interconnectedness, going back to that point of where do I end and the universe begins. And I think that space in between is where the regeneration happens.
Beautiful. And so, would you say you are a region?
Because I mean, I'm doing the most and the least. Because it's not about working like hard, like you would break your back trying to move all these, trying to move mountains. But I think we get to where we want to go when we start to transcend the self. So another interesting thing is, if you probably heard of Maslow's
Mm-hmm.
hierarchy, where it's like your base needs are met, then your emotional needs are met, and then you start getting to like, well, I want to achieve this. And the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, but that's not the top, because Maslow ended up dying before he could finish the pyramid. And the top of the pyramid is actually self-transcendence. So being in service to life-giving pathways, I think, is really the regenerative movement. So going from a consumer mindset to a service mindset, and a creator mindset, because once you dissolve the illusion of separation, you actually realize you are the creator. Like we are the creators. Like we're creating this reality. And I think that's like the shift.
Yeah. Yeah. Energy is your greatest currency.
The greatest currency is creativity.
Yeah, but also we could say that that comes from your energy, your creative energy, your overall energy, the vibration you put out to the world. That's that's what has the potential, I think, to make a change. Whether it be in a room, whether it be in a land, whether it be, with a tweet.
Well, okay, so I've had a shift in thinking recently too, where people say ride the wave.
Hmm.
And then now I'm thinking, no, 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 you have to be the wave. So the wave is just energy. And I think it's like, I think we get that energy from like the human element is what really energizes me. Like seeing, like we've been doing these work parties, and there's no greater feeling of connectedness and empowerment than getting with friends and actually putting the trees in the ground and being like, oh my God, like we're actually doing this. Like, even though it's like a little, we had a work party last weekend. We just did 10 meters. We put in 10 meters of a syntropic agroforestry line. But it's like people start believing. When they see it, they start believing, and that's when the energy starts going like, oh wow, this is like we can actually do this because we're doing it together, and it's not just
When they
me.
actually become the wave.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was so crazy too because we just had this heat wave and all these fires, and it's like summer's supposed to be dry, and we just put these plants in the ground, and then all of a sudden, like a huge rainstorm comes through, and like everybody's like just in disbelief, like, wow, it rained. Oh my God, that was like amazing. And the perfect timing, like right as like we got the plants right in the ground, and then bam, the aguacero starts.
There was it. Good. Oh man, I love it. Resonating a lot with you. So yeah, we're getting to the end, and I want to wrap this up with a final question, and that would be, what is your vision for the future world, or for the future of humanity?
The future world, yes, enter bioregional commons. So we have one planet, no borders, only bioregions that are in solidarity with human and life flourishing.
Beautiful. I cannot disagree with that vision. Beautiful. So thank you, Antonio.
I'll keep shouting it. I don't care if I look silly. You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Muy amable.
Oh no, so someone has to do it. Someone has to shout it out for sure. And not only shout it out, but actually do something about it. Become the wave.
Yeah, we are waving. It's called a wavicle. No, no. Yeah, wavicle. So it's a particle and a wave. So this idea of, is it this or is it that? It's like, okay, it can be both. And I think that's like being fluid is the like be like water, the
Yeah, and
Bruce Lee.
being aligned.
But yeah, thank you so much. My phone is on 1%.
Thank you, Antonio. This has been a great combo. I loved getting to know more about you and your roots. So thank you for being here in Web Through Roots podcast.
Totally. Thank you so much.
And we'll see you all in a next episode. Bye bye. Thank you.